Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we look to bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector and their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke
We've
into the
got a
space
very
industry.
special guest with us on the podcast today. We're joined by artist, author, veteran NASA astronaut and aquanaut, engineer and former International Space Station resident, Nicole Stott. She's flown 2 space flights and has spent a total of 104 days living and working in space. She's even completed an 18-day dive at the Aquarius Undersea Lab. As a female leader in the space sector, Nicole's passionate about inspiring more women to enter STEM fields, and she praises the organisations that are taking strides towards diversity and inclusion. Her passion for space and flight started from a very young age, alongside a natural flair for creativity. These interests and talents inspired her incredible career in the space sector, which we're really excited to share with you today.
Hey Nicole, how are you?
Great, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today, really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you're busy. I know this is relatively short notice as well, so I appreciate you coming on the show today. I guess the main, just kind of kick this thing off, the main reason why we started this, and Jack maybe talk this through with you, but the whole kind of ethos and the mission behind this podcast is to raise the curtain on the space sector at every level. It's not just people inside the sector, it's people from outside the sector. It's talking about diversity, inclusion, but for us, it's trying to. What we've realised is that space is not slowing down; it's growing, which is fantastic, and we don't ever see that slowing down. But we're going to get to a point in the near future where we're going to run out of talent and people that are actually going into the space sectors to sustain it. So we do this podcast in the hope that it will impact change at every level. Hopefully for younger generations that feel like space is beyond their grasp. It's not something that's accessible to them. It's something they feel that is just, completely out of their reach, but also people that are maybe really applicable and transferable to space, but just don't know it because they think that it's, rockets and astronauts and things like that. So this is to try and, hence the origin stories, is to talk to people on how they transitioned from outside of the sector, how they got into the sector, advice, and hopefully people can listen to this and use it as an area of resource, essentially. So if it's okay, it'd be good just to kind of kick us off, where we could start from the early days. Nicole, talk us through where you sort of started in life, where you grew up, school, college, that sort of thing, and eventually how you sort of found your way into your early career at NASA.
Yeah, I think, when I look back and think about that, how did I find my way? I think really if I'm totally looking at it and assessing it, is that it really started with parents who shared what they loved with me. From the youngest I can remember. And that's everything from, being 6 or 7, whatever it was, 6.5, maybe, sitting in front of the black and white TV, watching the Apollo missions and the moon landing, and going outside and looking at the moon. And I think even at that age, you realize that this is something really extraordinary that's happening. The thought of people walking around on this thing you see in the sky every night, even as a kid. And then my mom was this real, and still is, this really wonderfully creative person. Was a nurse, and but always, I think back to growing up, and she sewed mine and my sister's clothes. I can't even, for my son, I can barely make it to Target to buy underwear, right, for him. Thinking about sewing his clothes. And if I was to get to a ballet lesson or softball practice, it was because she was getting me there. And, and she encouraged things like ballet and art and that kind of stuff as well. And I'm old, so when I was growing up, it was back in the days of macrame and pottery and hooked rugs, and she was doing that and included me in that. So I feel like I developed this kind of creative side from her. And then my dad, also creatively outside of his work, liked to build and fly small airplanes. So I think pivotal in all of this was my mom getting us as kids to the airport to be with him, hanging out, watching people fly, hanging out with people who loved flying, and developing a love for flying myself, and not just to want to know how to fly, but to want to know how things fly. And I think that love is what evolved into deciding, even at the end of high school, where I didn't even know if I was going to go to college, it was like, well, if I'm going to, what do I want to study? And that was it. Okay, if I'm going to go to college, I want to study how things fly. And if you want to study how airplanes fly, why would you not want to know how rocket ships fly? And the space shuttle program was getting going at that time. And all of this, this space and flying just became this integral part of that passion, I think. And really fortunate to, have that experience as a kid, to, even while I was in high school, have teachers that taught elective courses about aviation and the basics of aeronautics, and at that time I was kind of baffled by that. One, I'm in high school, I didn't think you'd actually get to study something that you actually enjoy, have that be part of what high school was about. But I think it was really very just inspirational to what I was discovering I was most curious about myself. And I'm a rambler, Rich, so these kinds of things can go on forever with me for every single question. But I mean, I love looking back at it and thinking about it, because in the longer journey, to becoming an astronaut and doing what I'm doing now, I wasn't really thinking about that as a kid. I was inspired by space and that other people were going there, but it just seemed that I was able to bring it back to a more core curiosity about just how things fly. And that helped me really make important decisions about just even going to college, what I was going to study there, how that evolved to experiencing what was going around me at the time with the space shuttle and other things happening. And to choose to leverage that curiosity for what I would ultimately do as a career in life. Don't know that it was that, that it was that, I don't even know that was happening while that was going on. I just know that I enjoyed what I was considering, and it worked out really well.
So I love that. I love hearing the unique sort of inspirational stories of how people, when they got their first kind of taste of space and what made them get into it. But also I'm really, really inspired by people like yourself, like Melanie Strickland at Slingshot, and these people that you speak to that got inspired so early in life. There's so many people that I think go through life, and it's not a bad thing, a negative reflection on them, but they're always kind of trying to find what they want to do, what their purpose is. And sometimes it can take people a really long time to actually find something they truly enjoy, as opposed to just kind of falling into something or doing something, but actually being inspired at such a young age for it to then shape, for most of your life in terms of what you did at college and, all that kind of stuff, and going to work is amazing. And I think it's great to hear. I'm jealous personally, because I'm one of those people that just kind of went through life and then you find it a bit later on. But it's amazing to hear that was inspiring at such an early age. And I guess now that you're in the space sector, you've been in the space sector for a while now, what is it that you, I guess, in such a forever changing industry, what is it you love most about the space sector?
I think the thing that I love most about the space sector is that everywhere I look at within the space sector, whether it's human spaceflight activities, or if you're just looking at strictly, kind of the satellite industry, or even the new commercial space stuff that's going on, ultimately, all of it is about our future. I mean, really, in a very positively motivated way, it's about our future, and it's about improving life on Earth. And that I can't think of anything else. I mean, I really tried, like, where do you find that? And then there's such a, just really like this planetary cooperative endeavor that goes on with it. And, I think there's no better example of that than what's happening with, and has been happening for over 20 years with the International Space Station program, but just this really guiding example of how we can work at something that's really super challenging, very complex, at its very nature, and do that in such a cooperative and peaceful and successful way. I think it's just a wonderful example for how we should be doing more things down here on Spaceship Earth itself. And it's not just, the thing I love too is it's not just about overcoming the challenges of how do we get off Earth, out of this gravity that holds us here, and live and work just even for a short period of time in space, or have satellites orbiting our planet and sending back all of this wonderful information for us to use. But really, it comes down to taking advantage of that in a way that helps us and can continue to help us solve the most challenging problems we have right here on Earth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And one of the things I wanted to talk about around the whole sort of accessibility and solving problems, all that kind of stuff, is what I mentioned at the beginning around diversity and inclusion. And one of the big motives, again, for starting this podcast, as I mentioned, to make that accessible for everyone. One of the hot topics right now, not just across space, but I think STEM in general at the moment, is the diversity piece. Unfortunately, the stats are still not in a good position, not where they need to be. But I guess as a female leader within the sector, what are your thoughts on diversity in space, and what do you feel we should be doing differently across the industry and at STEM level to try and impact that change now and for future generations?
Yeah, the diversity and inclusion thing is, I mean, it's big everywhere. And,
yeah,
the thing, though, that's really interesting to me about the space sector is that I think, again, just like the International Space Station is this model for us, right? And I mean, talk about diversity and inclusion there. That's a globally inclusive kind of thing. The science is diverse, the people that are represented there. And yes, there's always improvements to be made, right? But I think, again, it's an amazing example. And if you look at, I mean, I love looking at just the evolution of NASA's workforce over time. And especially, and I speak mostly when I'm doing this, I speak from the human spaceflight side of things, is, just a little over 50 years ago, if you looked into the mission control center or the launch control centers for the Apollo missions, right? Mission control in Houston, there were no women in the front room. I mean, none. There was one woman, Poppy Northcutt, in the back room cranking away, the trajectory models and all of this data that was necessary for those flights to be successful. And in Florida, at the Launch Control Center, there was one woman, Joanne Morgan, smack dab in the middle of the Launch Control Center, the only woman, in that place. And now, it's been over 50 years ago now, but less than 50 years ago, 50 years after that, incredible women are running both of those facilities. And when you look at the people sitting at those consoles, it's not like, oh, where's Joanne? You're searching for that one woman in the crowd. It's just this mix of humanity. And I think represented very nicely across all of the demographics you might want to use, right?
Yeah.
And then within, again, just I use NASA, the astronaut office, went from just all white male test pilot, fighter pilot guys in the very beginning to very quickly including, different diverse populations. And now within the astronaut office, there's, I think, about 40 active astronauts and almost 40% are women. And
That's great.
it's huge. When you think about it, like I was on the board of trustees at my university, and we were always talking about this same topic. How do we encourage more women to enroll in the STEM related curriculums and fields? And a lot of universities, the top ones, struggle to encourage a 20-25% female enrollment. And then those numbers goes down when you talk about actually completing the programs. And it's like, I think about the astronaut office and I'm like, man, what is the secret sauce to this, to what's going on in NASA with human spaceflight, what's going on, just looking at kind of that, that little group of astronauts, how has this been happening when the populations that you're trying to pull from are, significantly less represented there. And I think it gets back to what we were talking about in the first question, which is, where does our inspiration come from? What are we being exposed to, across different kinds of fields of interest as kids? And, I think we really and truly have to get to our kids early
Yeah.
And I mean that in a good way. Like, we need to be sharing what we love with them. We need to use that as a way to encourage them to think about what they're most curious about, and let them know that it's all right to follow that curiosity to something bigger. And we need to then, I think about it like with my female colleagues in the astronaut office. Like, we need to really and truly accept our role as role models, even though we might not think about ourselves that way. We need to be present for young women, for, I think about my friend Leland Melvin, for people of color, all of these different groups that we're trying to encourage, trying to welcome into this industry. And I know that's a lot of ramble, and I'll also say that, let me just continue it. That, while I understand this push for STEM, I think we may have inadvertently done ourselves a little bit of a disservice too, because while we're trying to really open our arms, include people from all different backgrounds, which we need in the space industry, we don't not just need the engineers or the test pilots or the scientists. We need different kinds of thinkers in this industry, because that's what's necessary for solving the most challenging problems and bringing those different ideas together. And I think this push, this really focused push on STEM, really has a tendency to not just alienate other interesting groups that we could be including, experiential groups that we could be including in the industry and need to, but it's actually, I think, having them feel like they're not worthy, right? And that there isn't a place for them, when in actuality there really and truly is. And this is happening in the schools, it's happening later at university, and within the way we select people to do things for different jobs. I think we need to really open that A up in the STEM and this transition to STEAM. And then in my mind, it's like, let's get rid of all these acronyms and just look at how we are developing our students and ultimately our workforce in a way that uses their whole brains, that allows them to be the best problem solvers that we can put out there for, solving the challenges we have now and the ones that we, have to look forward to, I'm sure, in the future.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I definitely think, I think STEM definitely STEAM is the new STEM. I think I completely agree with you. We need to include the arts. There's no mention there around, sales, marketing, and actually that's the whole point of this, is to open up to absolutely everybody. And also, I think a part of that journey as well is definitely the STEAM angle that you mentioned, but also making it relatable, because I completely agree we do need to go much younger, because I think a lot of the STEM initiatives or STEAM initiatives that you see or you hear of, they're either at like a university or a college, or maybe it's secondary, like very rarely, but by that age it's too late. If you look at the statistics, they usually tend to change their mind somewhere around the 10-11-year-old stage. And I think actually when you're trying to educate and make it relatable and accessible, it's actually changing our approach and like exactly like you said, just opening it up to everybody and making it relatable to that age group as well.
Yeah, I love the word you use, relatable, because I think in the end, all of these kinds of things depend on a relationship, a connection, whether it's a kid discovering, the light bulb shining on them about what they're most curious about and what excites them and they want to know more about, and how I think we need to be encouraging them beyond that. It's like, okay, now how do you use this thing that you really at this point, as far as are so excited about, to consider how you can play a part in that and do something good for all life around you. And that's something think we need to incorporate more into all of the education that we do is, and I look at my son, whether it's a math class or whatever it might have been, through school, where he's asking me, why in the world do I need to to study this at school? Why am I having to take tests about this? And I think we should be able to answer that question for them in a way that lets them know this is part of something that will help you be a better problem solver, will help you make life better for everyone, all life around you, where you'll be, where your value can really shine. And I don't know that we necessarily do that. And we definitely should be doing it at the university level, where, anything anyone is studying should be part of how they're going to be a part of the solution to things.
Yeah, 100%. And that kind of does segue into the next part around the younger generation, how they perceive things, especially with like the modern day social media platforms and that kind of stuff, is around failures and achievements. Failures may be lessons learned and achievements, but with so many of these social media platforms now, people kind of see like the highlight reel of successes and the achievements and like the end product, but don't always see the hard work and the sacrifice and that kind of stuff that goes into leading up to that. So what would you, I guess, over your career, your personal life, what would you consider so far as your biggest failure or biggest lesson learned? And what did you learn from that? And on the other side of that fence, what would you consider so far your biggest achievement?
Well, I love the way you phrase this question in the beginning with regard to social media and stuff. It makes me think. I'm actually rethinking about the way I should be posting too. Whether it's for my personal posts or for what we put out there for the Space for Art Foundation, or other work being done. And I think there's something to those little missteps or challenges that came along and sharing those. So I thank you. I think I'm reconsider how some of the stuff is put out there. I mean, we do have a way. I mean, it's what we want to share. We want people to see the good stuff going on, right? And and uplift from that. But I think this is a difficult question, but I think the failure for me, I really look back and it is kind of questioning myself. I really think of that as a failure, is not appreciating enough about myself. And this is from young age too. And I can especially relate it to the decision, kind of this pathway to the decision to finally apply to be an astronaut, right? I mean, that's the easiest one for me to use, I think. But I know I was doing this along the way as a younger kid too. But I always, for the longest time, thought, oh, astronaut, that's something only other special people get to do. Why would they ever pick me? I've never done blah, blah, blah. All this stuff about like second guessing what whoever they are, might want from me to do this job. And I think that is such a disservice to ourselves to be almost like to be our worst critic in a way that takes us out of really wonderful opportunities that are out there. And I really and truly almost did that with the astronaut thing too. And it wasn't until, I don't know, probably 9 into the 10 years that I was already working for NASA as an engineer and doing what I thought was, really was such cool work on the space shuttle and the station program, and meeting people that had really gotten us to that point of doing those really incredible things and being surrounded by awesomeness, in every way, whether it was the hardware or the people again. And thankfully had the opportunity to see what astronauts do and watch them as they were coming through and getting ready, to fly on the vehicles I was part of the team helping get ready for them to fly on, and realize that, wow, 99.9% of an astronaut's job is not flying in space, sadly, to astronauts. and, and as best I could tell, the majority of that was a lot like what I was already doing as a NASA engineer. And that encouraged me to at least consider applying. But the key for me would not have come from within myself. sadly, would not have come from within myself, because I would have continued to second guess it. It was from, thankfully, having, I don't know, the courage, the whatever, to ask people that I considered to be mentors if I should do it. Should I apply to be an astronaut? I was thinking about this. Should I apply? And thankfully, they did what I think is the best thing they could have done for me, which was to just simply say, yeah, why don't you just fill out the application?
Yeah.
And at that time, it was like, pick up the pen and fill out the application. They were not overly encouraging. They were, oh, Nicole, you'd make the best astronaut there ever was. They might say that now. I'd like to think so, but but they didn't do that. They didn't over the top it with me, but they also didn't discourage me. They didn't say, oh, well, Nicole, tens of thousands of people apply to do this. It's a real long shot, but you might want to try. You could apply, but they didn't do that either. Because I think if they had, I would have still not done it. But I think in the end, really, it was like they were giving me permission to do the single thing I had control of in the whole process, which was to apply. And I'm so thankful to them. I thank them every time I see them. But that's just, again, a long way of saying that, man, we got to stop discouraging ourselves from pursuing things that we're interested in, that we're curious about. And I think that might be what's happening, to young kids before that middle school age. Something discourages them, and then they continue to do that to themselves. And that makes me sad. So I think that's the thing we need to figure out, is how do we get that out of the system, whether it's from a teacher or a parent or a friend or something in the media, the social media, whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it's back to the previous question around how do we tailor our approach to that generation? How do we, like we say, how make it relatable? And no, absolutely. And would you also, in terms of your business Space for Art Foundation, it'd be great. Would you mind just telling our listeners about what Space for Art Foundation do, how they fit into the space sector, and sort of where do you see the company being over the next 5 years?
Yeah, and thanks for asking about it. I would put this, the Space for Art Foundation as what I consider one of my biggest achievements as well. And, the biggest one, if in response to the last question too, which I didn't answer the second half, is my family, my son, and now having the honor really to see what he does and all of these kinds of things we're talking about today, whether it's in the space sector or not, just really looking forward to where his curiosity leads him. But the Space for Art Foundation is, in the shortest possible way, we are doing space-themed art therapy projects with kids all over the world. And our motto is that we are uniting a planetary community of children through the awe and wonder of space exploration and the healing power of art. And the pathway for me to this whole thing was, people, it's so strange. Why, you were an astronaut. Don't you want to keep flying in space? Why would you want to go off, leave that and go, work with kids? And I'm thinking, or the question will come, man, you've done this astronaut thing, the greatest thing you could ever achieve in your life, right? I've had it expressed to me that way. What could possibly top that now? And that gets you in the gut, right? It's like, wow, should I just it's like, holy moly, aren't we meant to take what we've experienced and then apply it to something new and, perhaps even better, in a better way to continue doing good? And that's what I feel like I've discovered in this is my next mission, that, I understand now, hey, I had this opportunity to go live and work in space the way I did in order to come back to Earth and work on these Space for Art projects. And for me, that evolved from having the opportunity to do a little bit of painting in space. I kind of think about that, the human and human spaceflight kind of thing, where we bring what we love from Earth to space with us. And, astronauts have been doing that for years in different ways with music and photography and poetry and all kinds of things. And how I could use that experience in space to I don't know, establish relationships with people who might not even know what's going on in space, and has been for so many years, that's about improving life on Earth. And art to me is this universal communicator, right? I can engage with people that don't even know there's a space station.
Yeah.
And through the art I create, that's primarily, and this is on my own personal side, that's primarily about my interpretation of what I saw through the windows of the space station. You know, whether they like my art or not, I can engage them in the conversation of what's going on in space. That's all about helping them, you know, and everyone and all life here on Earth. And then also they're the ones that then want the app on their phone that spot the station, and how do they know where it is and what's going on up there. But it felt really important to me to find kind of an interesting way to engage with the populations, the people that just don't know necessarily what's going on, which I think what we're trying to do here, right? And encourage people to look at space as another pathway for what they might be interested in. And then that led me to working with people, one person in particular, Ian Sion at MD Anderson in Houston at the Pediatric Cancer Center there, where he had founded the Art and Medicine program. And long story short, we took space as this very inspirational theme and applied it with the artwork for the kids. And then the company, I will say the spacesuit company, ILC Dover, has volunteered with us since the very beginning to quilt together the kids' artwork into these just stunning art spacesuits, a couple of which have flown in space. And then we've expanded our projects through the work with artists and creators like Maria Lanus to bring these kids' planetary artwork together in different forms. And I don't know, you know, our space is inspirational, right? The idea, whether somebody wants to go there themselves or not, it really gets kids, I think, especially thinking about their future, imagining themselves doing something really, really incredible. And for the kids that we primarily work with, you know, pediatric cancer centers, refugee centers, orphanages, very rural schools around the world, you know, these are kids in places that, you know, and in most part, you hope is the worst thing they ever have to go through in their entire lives, you know, the biggest challenge of their lives, hopefully. And yet they are, through the artwork and the inspiration of space, they're like transcending that time. And they are thinking about their future, and they're talking about what they might do in space or out of it, and relating it in a way that they might not have otherwise. And that's why it's so inspirational and compelling to me to just continue this work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's amazing. I love it. And it's such a unique approach to our sector as well. And absolutely love that. The next couple of, well, our next couple of questions are very heavily linked to what I said at the beginning around trying to make this podcast and these episodes as resourceful as possible. So getting advice and, you know, real world actual advice from people like yourself. And it's around the resource that you've identified, you know, whether it's mentors or programs, advice and that kind of stuff. Just before I go on to that, I have to ask the question, the overview effect. Is that a thing? And if so, if it is, how would you say it's impacted you and your perspective?
Well, I think it absolutely is a thing. I hope any of my colleagues that you speak to would agree. I don't know that any of us, like for me, before flying, I hadn't met Frank White yet, the philosopher, author who coined that term, but discovered him and his work after flying in space. But what I found was like there was this voice through what Frank had already expressed in his work. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, this so beautifully speaks to what I experienced. And, you know, we've used this word connection a number of times in our conversation today. And I think that was it. It's like, wow, I was in space looking out a window at my home. That's a planet. Like, holy moly, I live on a planet. And realizing that I was feeling more connected to it and to everything and everyone on it than I maybe had necessarily with my feet
Yeah.
on it. And I just wanted to find ways to communicate that to people, to keep it, like, not just, in what I had seen, but in how I was feeling and what was kind of in me. And this sense of interconnectivity that, I don't think you can find in any better way than looking out the window of a spaceship, but I don't think you have to go to space to experience if you open up your heart and mind to it. I mean, I'm looking out in my backyard now and I'm in awe of just looking up at the sky that looks like it goes on forever. And yet we know it's this veil thin, blanket that wraps around us and protects us. And that's awesome. And that's wonderful. And that's the kind of things that we need to be appreciating. And I think that's what the overview effect is all about. It's like, how do you bring that into your heart, in your mind, and then use it for something good? And that's something good to me is certainly through the work of the Space for Art Foundation. But I wrote a book called Back to Earth, which is basically about everything we've talked about today, and and more, and how we establish that relationship with our fellow Earthlings and with our planet as our life support system. And what is our role as crewmates here on Spaceship Earth to and to encourage the goodness and all of that, to encourage the sustaining of what it is about Earth that keeps us alive. And you might think about that like that's selfishly motivated, but in the end, that's the thing we have to do. If we pay attention to what it is about Earth that keeps us alive, we'll be doing all the right things that, that are just like what we have to do every day on our mechanical life support system in space. But in short, yes, I do believe the over effect is a thing.
Absolutely. No, beautifully said. Couldn't agree more. That's amazing to hear. And I guess throughout your career, and whether that's in work or academia, what would you say? And the reason why we put we asked this on the podcast is, I think, again, going back to the whole, not trying to pick on like social media and stuff, but I think the internet is a beautiful thing. But I think there can be a lot of misinformation around, which is why we try to bring on guests like yourself that's been there, done that, and can be resourceful to people wanting to get into the space sector. So what would you say is the best resources that you've kind of identified and utilized over the years, and whether that be courses or programs or mentors that kind of helped you segue into the space sector?
Well, I think the mentor thing is huge. And I cannot, whether it was programs or courses, those were things that I discovered along the way that just fell out of what I was curious about, right? But the mentor thing to me is so significant because it allowed me to reconsider myself, I guess. That those people were just pivotal in the places where I look at where I made decisions that were really, really the things that kept me on this path. It's because of other people encouraging me, like, pick up the pen, fill out the application. It couldn't get any more simple than that, right? And yet I wouldn't have done that on my own. And so I think the people in your life that help you reconsider in a positive way what you're already curious about, what you're already excited about and want to pursue, but have somehow second guessed, that was really, really important. And to not downplay those people. These are people that you might not want to believe might know more about you than you know about yourself, right?
Yeah.
That's a little difficult. It's like, how could, it's like parents, sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't know better for our kids, but when they don't want to consider it, it's like, oh my gosh, how can I, I've already learned this. Why won't he listen to me? But we have to open ourselves up to that. And I think in a way that really allows us to be our best selves. I know if I hadn't done that, whether I had pursued an aeronautical engineering degree or not, without those people kind of helping me reconsider myself and put myself out there, I don't know if I'd be talking to you today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hopefully people listen to this and identify. I think a lot of it is why I think people are just scared to ask the question. I think when they identify a mentor that's relevant to them, actually approach them, so hopefully they'll get the confidence to start moving forward. But no, absolutely. And that you'll be happy to hear, we're on to our conclusive question.
Oh, well, you might be happy to hear, right?
No, I could talk to you all day. This has absolutely been amazing. I feel so grateful, privileged that actually I get the opportunity to speak to people like you and actually find out all this stuff. It's unbelievable. It's amazing to hear. And thank you so much, by the way, for asking. I just want to kind of recognize you for coming onto this show and giving so much of your time. And also, thank you. I know you're especially busy for coming on to the show, and
we all are. You know, I think it's all relative, right? And I'm thankful for you asking me and for the work that you guys are doing, you know, to open up this world to people who might not be considering it as well. And I mean, that's part of the solution, right? Just awareness is a big deal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And the final piece for us is the advice, you know, for that person that we've kind of been, I guess, talking about and relating this whole thing to throughout this podcast episode, that person that maybe is looking at a space as something that's just never achievable in their lifetime. And that person could be from any background, you know, want to pursue anything, whether it's art, sales, marketing, engineering, technology, you know, whatever it is. What advice would you give for that person that's looking to get into the space sector in 2022 and beyond?
Wow. Well, I think it goes along with what we've been talking about all along, is really, you know, you gotta pay attention to what you're curious about. And I think that's different than, I think it falls into this idea of passion as well. You know, there's this idea, oh, you got to go pursue what you're passionate about. And I think it is, but I think there's underlying that passion needs to be a curiosity, right? Something that's really just, you're just excited about it all the time, and want to learn more, want to meet more people that are involved with it, and pursue more opportunities. And I think that curiosity is what really opens those things up for us, the introductions to people, the willingness to reach out to someone. And, you know, on top of that is, whether it's the space sector or not, I think is we've got to find ways to encourage people to stop second guessing themselves. And on the other side of that, I think, is this expectation that there's just a checklist of, here, and I'll use astronaut as an example because I get asked the question all the time. If I want to be an astronaut, what are the 5 things I have to do to be selected?
Yeah.
And sadly, there's not one of those lists, right? And people get so discouraged. It's like, I say, okay, you know, you need to do the work. And this is hard. All this stuff is hard work, regardless of what you want to do in the space sector. It's hard work, but there's such benefit from it, right? But there's not a checklist for any one of these things. There's basic requirements, right? You know, NASA very clearly states, you know, here's the education, the career, the medical at a very basic level. Here's what you have to satisfy. And then outside that, what's so wonderful is that it's pretty wide open, you know? And I think people need to appreciate that more and put their own personal twist on it. Because that, I can tell you, when I'm sitting on the other side of the table, interviewing somebody who wants to be an astronaut, your resume has already got you to that place, like all of the other people. But now I want to know you, and I want to understand this curiosity that got you here. I want to understand that you've developed a way to work as a crew, you know, as a good team member, that you have acknowledged not just your strengths, but your weaknesses. And that might speak to the social media thing, is we've got to be able to recognize on our own weaknesses and things, and how we best take advantage of all that diversity out there to fill in for where I'm not the strongest, and that you have a personality.
Yeah.
And that might sound, you know, that might sound like, well, what do you care if I have a personality or not? It's like, whether you're locked up in a spaceship for 6 months with somebody, you know, relatively confined space, or you're working as a team trying to solve, you know, some of life's most challenging problems, you've got to be able to enjoy that. I mean, I think that's where the curiosity base comes from as well. And I think there's so much more to how we achieve things than just this expectation that there's this rote checklist for us to follow. And that's why it makes it so hard to answer the question too. But even in the space sector, it comes down to what you're most curious about, and where you want that to fit in to being part of the solution for the problems that surround us.
Absolutely. Thanks ever so much. Nicole Stott, thank you so much again for coming on our show. I hope our listeners have enjoyed as much as I have. Guys, please give her a follow on LinkedIn, social media, follow her company, Spaceflight Foundation, and you can get her book from Amazon, Back to Earth, and also download on Audible as well. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on today. Really, really appreciate it. It's been amazing.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Excellent. Thanks ever so much, Nicole.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one. All right. See you. Bye.